She walked in quietly. No designer bag, no gold watch, just an old uniform and a defiant look in her eyes. And it only took 30 seconds for the entire showroom to burst out laughing. But less than 24 hours later, they'd be on their knees, forced to reflect, when she returned with her father. A reversal that shook the entire automotive industry. A harsh lesson for those who blindly mock others based on appearance. And a story you need to watch until the very last second to understand why. You should never underestimate someone just because they don't dress like you. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to update our latest videos. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the high-end glass panels of Valaris Prestige Autos, casting a shimmering glow around the showroom's fleet of Porsches. Luxury cars resting like silent deities on polished pedestals. The automatic doors parted, and in walked Serenity Blake, a 17-year-old black girl in a worn-out school uniform, scuffed sneakers, and a fraying backpack slung over one shoulder. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The soft murmurs at the consultation counter fell silent. Every pair of eyes, from the blonde receptionist to the technician adjusting a wheel in the back, turned to her. Not because they recognized someone important, but because they couldn't fathom how someone like her had just walked into a place like this. Serenity noticed. She was used to those looks in the polished hallways of her academy, in high-end clothing stores, and now, here, where a single car cost more than the entire block she lived on. But today, she didn't shrink back. She walked slowly toward the center display, a Porsche Mirage GT in pearl white. Its glossy surface reflected her image, small, modest, and completely out of place in this world of bulletproof glass and financial privilege. But in her eyes, there was something else, curiosity, and a flicker of boldness no one in that showroom could see. Behind the counter, a young employee muttered, "Is she lost?" Another one snorted, "Nah, probably here for a brochure." Serenity stood before the car, her eyes lit with fascination. She reached out and gently touched the door handle, unaware that this simple gesture would trigger a chain of events that would shake the elite circles of Los Angeles to their core. And upstairs, behind a frosted office window, Sterling Cross stepped out, his eyes locking onto her like a predator spotting something that didn't belong. The sharp click of polished leather shoes echoed steadily across the marble floor. Sterling Cross, general manager of Valaris Prestige Autos, appeared in a flawless silver-gray suit, silk tie, and a rehearsed smile reserved only for unwelcome visitors. His eyes landed on Serenity Blake, who was still admiring the interior of the Porsche Mirage GT, a model that started at nearly $600,000. He approached, just close enough to exert pressure, but still within the limits of corporate politeness. "Excuse me, what exactly are you doing?" he asked, his voice dipped in thin courtesy. Serenity turned politely. "Just looking, sir. This car is really beautiful." Sterling's eyes flicked from her head to her worn sneakers. The wrinkled school uniform, the fraying backpack, the simple tied-back hair, each detail to him read like an indictment. He gave a small chuckle, the kind people use when they think they've heard something adorably absurd. "Looking is fine, but—" He lowered his voice slightly, just enough so the staff nearby and a few customers could hear every word. "For someone who clearly isn't planning to buy, I'd recommend not touching. Porsches aren't here for selfies or teenage daydreams." The sentence hit like a slap across the face. A nearby middle-aged couple snickered. A female associate raised an eyebrow. the disdain in her expression undisguised. Serenity gripped the strap of her backpack tighter. She wanted to say something, that she wasn't here to beg, that she had only come to see, with her own eyes, the car she'd once taped to her bedroom wall. But her lips pressed shut. No defense, no justification. Sterling stepped a bit closer. This time his voice dropped even lower. Just for her. No money? Then don't even dream of touching it. This isn't a place for people like you. No shouting, no foul words, but the ones he did choose, and how he said them, pierced deeper than any insult. And as Serenity turned to leave, her back straight, steps slow but steady, no one in that showroom realized what had just happened. They didn't know. They had just made the biggest mistake of their careers, one that would soon cost Valaris Prestige Autos not just its pride, but its entire reputation. The automatic glass door slid shut behind Serenity, leaving a moment of quiet, before the room behind her erupted like a smug little tea party laced with venom. A group of well-dressed customers in the lounge, sipping espresso and flipping through investment brochures, began murmuring, "Honestly thought she was the cleaning lady. Everyone's trying to be an Instagram rich kid these days." The laughter was soft, just low enough to be denied if challenged, but sharp enough to cut deep. It wasn't the kind of loud mockery that made headlines. It was quieter, colder, like 100 tiny needles piercing dignity without leaving a trace. At the front desk, a young blonde receptionist threw a smirk toward Sterling Cross. Manager Cross handled that clean. Imagine someone like her asking for a test drive. Only one person didn't join in. Eli Navarro, a service tech near the corner. He had seen everything. He said nothing. But his eyes darkened, and his hand clenched the window wiper until his knuckles turned white. And Serenity? She stepped out into the dry golden sunlight of Los Angeles. The warm wind tugged gently at her hair, carrying the scent of luxury cologne from the showroom behind her. A scent that deep down she knew was never meant to belong to her. She didn't cry, but her deep brown eyes shimmered, like they would break if someone just touched her. Her hand slipped into her worn backpack. She pulled out her phone and quietly typed a message. "I'm okay. I just wanted to ask, are you busy?" A minute later, a reply popped up. Just 3 words. "On my way." Somewhere across town, just 15 minutes away. Cassian Blake stood up from a glass conference table on the 41st floor. He glanced at his phone, and everything about his expression changed. Not with rage, but with something colder. A storm was coming, not loud, but inevitable. That night, the hilltop estate in Pacific Heights sank into an unusual stillness. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows, glinting in the warm amber glow of the desk lamp where Cassian Blake sat unmoving. Across from him, Serenity curled into the armchair, her face still stained with the dried traces of tears. On the table between them lay a business card. Sterling Cross, Sales Director, Valaris Prestige Autos. It sat in silence, like a stain on the social fabric they never asked to touch. Cassian listened to her recount every detail. He didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. He wasn't the kind of man who angered easily. But behind those quiet, fathomless eyes, a storm was gathering. Every time Serenity choked up. When she described the mocking laughter, the condescending stares, the words, "no money," "then you need to leave." Cassian's hand clenched the edge of his chair tighter, until his knuckles turned white. "I just wanted to look," Serenity whispered, her eyes still red. I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted to feel close to something I dreamed of. But they looked at me like I was garbage. Cassian stood. He walked toward the window, staring out at the city, breathing under the rain. Years of clawing his way up from homelessness, of being denied for the color of his skin. They all came flooding back. "You are not garbage," he said, voice deep and steady. "You're a diamond." They were too blind to recognize. Then he turned back to her. There was something burning quietly in his eyes now. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go back there. But this time, they'll be the ones bowing their heads." Serenity opened her mouth, to ask why, to ask how. But then she looked into her father's eyes. And what she saw wasn't just a father's love. It was the look of Cassian Blake, billionaire founder of Blake Venture Holdings, a man who could rattle the foundations of the financial world with a single nod. That night, Serenity couldn't sleep, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was anticipation. For the justice the world had long owed her. The next morning, the air at Valoris Prestige Autos felt unusually still. Soft sunlight poured through the crystal-clear glass walls, dancing across the flawless curves of the luxury Porsche lineup on display. The staff moved across the marble floor as if walking a stage, because here they didn't just sell cars, they sold status. Sterling Cross, still in his signature charcoal grey suit with precision-folded collar tabs, stood near the entrance. Tablet in hand, he scanned the morning's VIP appointments. Names adorned with titles like CEO, Vice President, and Trust Fund Heir. Then a sound shattered the calm, low, deep, and commanding. Not the engine of an ordinary car, it was the growl of power approaching. A jet-black Rolls-Royce Phantom, polished to a mirror-like sheen, glided into the VIP parking bay. Every employee stood straighter. Sterling instinctively adjusted his cufflinks and flashed his most polished smile. In his mind, there were only two kinds of people who arrived in a Phantom: the ultra-wealthy or the dangerous elite. The door opened. A tall man stepped out, calm, composed, and utterly unreadable. He didn't walk like a customer. He walked like a man used to giving orders. A midnight blue bespoke suit hugged his frame. His eyes were hidden behind tinted sunglasses, but the gravity of his presence was unmistakable. Sterling moved quickly to greet him, commercial charm in full display. "Good morning, sir. We're honored to welcome you today. May I ask which Porsche model you're interested in?" The man removed his sunglasses. His gaze was cold, quiet, but beneath that stillness was a depth that made the air feel heavier. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes scanned the showroom and stopped exactly where his daughter had stood the day before, alone, surrounded by mocking stares. And then he spoke, voice deep, calm, each word landing like stone on marble. "I'm not here for the cars. I'm here for my daughter." For one suspended second, the entire showroom froze. Sterling blinked. Silence swallowed the room, then a forced chuckle. "Sir, I'm not sure I follow." Cassian Blake locked eyes with him. This time, not hiding anything. He didn't need to introduce himself. He didn't need a business card. Because the name Cassian Blake was an empire unto itself. A realm Sterling Cross had never been, and would never be, invited into. And just then, like a thunderclap to his ego, a voice rang from the entrance. "Dad." Serenity Blake stepped into the showroom. Gone was the worn-out school uniform. Gone was the timid posture. She wore a simple black blazer. But the way she stood beside Cassian said it all. I am his daughter, and I remember every face that laughed at me yesterday. The staff stopped breathing. Sterling took a step back. His tablet slipped from his hands, hitting the floor with a soft, forgotten thud. No raised voices, no accusations. The mere presence of Cassian and Serenity Blake was enough. Enough to deliver a death sentence. To the blind arrogance of an industry that thought it could measure worth by wardrobe. Sterling Cross stood frozen. The name that had just echoed through the air, Serenity Blake, sliced through his polished confidence like a blade of ice. Customers in the showroom began murmuring. Behind the service counter, a clerk stopped mid-keystroke. One by one, all eyes turned toward Cassian and Serenity, stunned, uneasy, and unmistakably fearful. Cassian took a single step forward. No security, no assistant. He didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. Because real power has always known how to silence a room. He stared directly at Sterling Cross, his voice low and razor-sharp. I didn't come here today to browse your cars. I didn't come to test an engine, and I certainly didn't come to negotiate anything. A long, suffocating pause. Sterling swallowed hard. Cassian continued, I came here to look into the eyes of the people who humiliated my daughter. Right here, in this exact spot, just because she wore an old-school uniform. And I want to hear your explanation. Sterling stammered, grasping for composure. Mr. Blake, I truly don't know what happened yesterday. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Cassian cut in, his voice raised, not a shout, but sharpened steel. A misunderstanding. A 17-year-old black girl was laughed out of your showroom. No one asked her name. No one asked what she needed. You looked at her worn shoes and passed judgment. The entire space was crushed by silence. Serenity stepped forward. Her voice shook slightly, but rang clear. I didn't come here to get an apology. I came to see if, after meeting my father, you'd still wear the same expressions as you did yesterday. Sterling looked around for somewhere to hide, but there was none. Just 4 glass walls, and a room full of eyes turning into a courtroom without a judge. At that moment, Victor Langston, the owner of Valaris Prestige Autos, arrived, just in time to witness the tail end of the confrontation. He stepped forward, face pale as ash, and quickly pulled Sterling back. Mr. Blake, we deeply apologize for the incident. Sterling will be placed under internal review. If you'd allow... Cassian lifted his gaze to Victor, his eyes like honed blades. I'm not interested in an internal review. I want a system that rethinks how it sees people. And I will be the one setting the terms for that change. Cassian Blake didn't yell, but every word he spoke landed like a lash, striking at the core of a corporate culture rotting from within. In the breathless stillness, a soft "yes, sir" echoed from the back of the showroom. Eli Navarro, the only employee who had dared to smile at Serenity the day before, stood tall, eyes bright. Cassian turned to him and gave a slight nod. Inside the suffocating silence of Valaris Prestige Autos, once a stage for million-dollar handshakes and polished laughter, there was now only the sound of hearts pounding in the chests of those who knew. Their masks were about to be stripped away. All eyes turned toward the young man stepping forward. Eli Navarro, the small name tag on his shirt, had been tucked beneath his jacket. A survival instinct in a toxic workplace. But today, he no longer wanted to hide. Eli stood between Cassian Blake and Sterling Cross. between two worlds, one of silent power and the other of exposed fear. His voice was hoarse from tension, but every word landed like nails driven into the pristine showroom floor. My name is Eli Navarro. I work in after-sales service, and I was the only one yesterday who saw Miss Serenity walk in. He swallowed hard, fists clenched at his sides, then continued. I saw the look in her eyes. I saw how people laughed. I saw how they looked at her, like she didn't belong. Another employee shifted, about to interject, but Eli raised a hand firmly. I'm not saying this to earn points. I'm saying it because I've stayed silent too long. And because I believe, if I don't have the courage to stand up for what's right, then I'm no different from those who were wrong. Sterling shot him a cold glare. You're digging your own grave, kid. But Eli just smiled, his first smile since stepping forward, and turned to Cassian. I don't know who you are, sir, but I know who she is. Miss Serenity was the only person in that entire showroom yesterday who wasn't pretending. And I confirm, every word she said is true, and I'll sign whatever statement you need to prove it. A chill ran down Sterling's spine. Victor Langston, standing behind Cassian, watched Eli carefully, as if seeing, for the first time, a hidden gem buried beneath the dust of arrogance. Cassian looked at Serenity. She met Eli's eyes, and what shone in hers was more than gratitude. It was trust. Trust that not everyone in this world is blind. Then, for the first time, warmth entered Cassian's voice. You won't be fired, Eli. In fact, I think you'll be needing a new desk, one with a window, and a nameplate made of real wood. Sterling's jaw tightened, and in that moment, the balance of power in the room shifted. It no longer belonged to the ones in suits and titles. It belonged to those who dared to speak the truth, when truth had become taboo. Sterling Cross stood frozen. Eli's words, each one a precise incision, didn't draw blood, but they peeled back the layers of false prestige Sterling had wrapped himself in for years. The air inside the showroom remained heavy, almost suffocating. Cassian Blake stepped forward slowly toward the center of the room. He didn't speak with emotion. He spoke with the weight of someone who'd walked through the courtrooms of power. I could demand a termination right here. I could ask Mr. Langston to write a formal apology, or even compensate my daughter with a free posher. But I don't need a car to feel respected. And my daughter doesn't need hollow apologies to erase the pain of being humiliated. He paused, locking eyes with Victor Langston. What I need is an awakening. Victor frowned. What do you mean? Cassian looked between Sterling and Victor. I want both of you, Sterling Cross, this showroom's manager, and you, Victor Langston, the man who allowed this culture to thrive, to spend 1 week at Beacon Reach Center. A wave of murmurs rippled through the staff. Sterling nearly scoffed. Hold on. You want us to go to that shelter for street kids? To do what? Ladle soup. Cassian didn't smile, neither did Serenity. He simply reached into his blazer and pulled out a folder. This is my partnership proposal with Beacon Reach Center, a place I've funded for the past 5 years to help homeless youth gain life skills, job training, and, most of all, dignity. I don't need you to cook meals or teach classes. I need you to look. Look into the eyes of the children society cast aside, the same way you dismissed my daughter because of her appearance. Silence. Victor Langston clenched his jaw. Sterling's face turned pale. Cassian turned to Serenity, his voice softer now. You don't have to forgive them, Serenity, but you should witness what happens when a broken system is forced to change. We don't punish them by tearing them down. We make them see what they've chosen to ignore. Cassian Blake didn't choose revenge. He chose confrontation through clarity. And in a world where money is too often used to bury mistakes, he chose something far more valuable: the truth. Monday, 7 a.m. A sleek black SUV pulled up in front of Beacon Reach Center, a place where peeling walls were covered with children's murals, where there was no designer cologne, no luxury sunglasses. Only one thing lived here: truth. Sterling Cross stepped out of the car in a perfectly tailored suit and polished shoes, still carrying a hint of arrogance, as if this were just a social obligation he'd breeze through. Next to him, Victor Langston wore dark glasses, still glued to his phone, scanning the surroundings like he was evaluating a bad investment pitch. But what they didn't know, today they weren't here to evaluate. They were here to be made to see. Inside the center, children lined up for breakfast: dry bread, powdered milk. Yet every pair of eyes sparkled. Every thank you rang out like gold being handed down. In the corner sat a dark-skinned boy with messy curls. Next to him, a tattered backpack with one strap sewn back together using a red shoelace. His name was Zion. A staff member introduced him to Sterling. This boy lost his mother last year. His father left, addicted and gone. But every morning, Zion shows up first. He helps the younger kids wash their hands, set the tables, read books. Honestly, he could teach you both. More than you think. Sterling forced a polite smile. He crouched slightly, asking, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Zion looked up at him, not with naivety, but with quiet, soul-deep clarity. "I want to be a person. Not everyone gets to be one." Sterling froze. The smile vanished from his lips. That day he was assigned to clean bathrooms alongside two boys with cerebral palsy, pick up trash with a young girl who had Down syndrome. She kept calling him Mr. Shiny Suit. And finally, sit in a small room as Zion read poems aloud, where each child wrote their dreams on the wall. On Zion's board, there was only one line: "I wish grown-ups would stop looking at us like we're a burden." Sterling couldn't breathe. The small room suddenly felt too small. By late afternoon, with the soft rain falling outside, Sterling sat silently on the center's porch. His clothes were stained, his hands still dusted with flour, his collar crumpled, and for the first time in his life, the man who once said, "No money, no touch," no longer dared to touch anything at all. The rain hadn't stopped. Heavy drops fell from the rusted tin roof onto the cracked tile steps, creating a slow, steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of someone trying to stay calm while panicking inside. Sterling Cross sat beside Zion in the cramped reading room. The air smelled of old, damp paper, yet somehow it felt warmer than any luxury boardroom he'd ever stepped into. Zion pulled an old, peeling backpack from under the table. One corner was torn wide open, revealing dog-eared books poking out. Sterling glanced at it, frowning, and asked with a mix of pity and curiosity, "Why don't you just get a new one?" The boy paused, then gently pulled the bag closer, as if afraid someone might take it. Zion looked at Sterling. His eyes weren't wet, but they were ice cold. "It was the last thing my mom gave me before she died. I might be poor, I might be hungry, but I won't throw away the only thing she left behind." The room fell completely silent. Only the rain whispered outside in shallow puddles. Sterling opened his mouth, but no words came. His throat tightened, his heart clenched, because in that moment he remembered the $80,000 Rolex he once threw in the trash because it had a scratch, and suddenly he felt completely hollow. Zion continued sorting his torn books. He wasn't angry. He didn't want pity. He was just living with more dignity than most adults Sterling had ever met. Sterling whispered, "I'm sorry for asking that." Zion didn't reply, but he smiled. A small smile, not bitter, just a silent kind of forgiveness. That night, Sterling didn't leave right away. He stood for a long time in front of a mural painted on the wall, a row of children holding hands. One of them had a red backpack with a ripped strap. Below the painting, a messy quote scrawled in marker read, "Don't look at me with pity. Look at me with respect." And for the first time in his life, Sterling Cross asked himself if he had ever truly deserved to be looked at that way. That night, in a penthouse wrapped in glass and city lights, Sterling Cross sat alone in front of his laptop screen. Outside, the sky over Los Angeles shimmered with the glow of streetlights, like shards of dreams not yet realized. But inside Sterling, there was a rare kind of stillness. He had been staring at an unsent message for over 30 minutes, reading it again and again. Serenity. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just wanted to say, I was wrong. Not because of who your father is, but because you deserved respect from the very beginning. I'm sorry. Sterling's hands trembled slightly, partly from emotion, partly from fear. Fear of being seen as weak, fear of admitting that for years he had lived life wrong. But finally, he hit send, not because he expected a reply, but because something inside him, something that cold, gleaming poshers could never fill, had begun to stir. For the first time, he didn't feel proud to be a manager at Valaris. He felt ashamed. A few minutes later, a reply appeared. It was short. I don't need an apology, but if you mean it, then change. No exclamation mark, no emoji, just a sentence. Director, like a mirror held to his face. And it kept Sterling awake all night. He stepped out onto the balcony. The wind was cool against his skin. Beneath his feet, the city sparkled in splendor. But inside him, a single question echoed, have I ever done anything truly decent? The next morning, Sterling didn't head to work right away. He put on a simple coat, walked into a small second-hand bookstore, and bought a leather-bound journal. Not to track sales figures, but to start writing down the things he had forgotten. Politeness doesn't equal kindness. Wealth doesn't equal worth. Being a good manager doesn't mean you know how to be a good person. On the first page, he wrote, I'm sorry, Serenity, I will learn everything. From the beginning. A few days later, the automatic glass doors of Valaris Prestige Autos slid open once more. But this time, it wasn't a girl with worn-out sneakers. And it wasn't a silent father returning for revenge. It was Cassian Blake himself, stepping in, wearing a charcoal grey suit and dark sunglasses, quiet as a storm that had been forecasted long before it hit. Every employee in the showroom stood up at once. Sterling Cross quickly adjusted his collar and stepped out of his office, wearing a smile rehearsed hundreds of times in front of the mirror. Mr. Blake, what an honor to have you back. May I ask what you're looking for today? I'd like to purchase 2 Porsche Valor S-Series vehicles. One in midnight blue, one in silver frost. Sterling beamed, already making his way toward the sales desk, but Cassian didn't even look at him. Instead, he turned toward the back of the showroom. I want Eli Navarro to handle the contract. The air was sucked from the room. Sterling froze in place. Eli, The young man who once stood nervously beside Serenity could hardly believe his ears. He looked up, pointing at himself. "Me?" Cassian nodded. "You were the only one who saw the real person, when there was nothing flashy to show." A soft clap echoed from the far side of the room, then another, and then the entire showroom joined in. This applause wasn't for the client. It was for an employee, someone once deemed too timid to rise. Inside the glass-walled office, Eli nervously flipped through the paperwork. Cassian sat patiently, smiling. "You don't need to be perfect, Eli," he said. "You just need to be kind. That's what Valoris has been missing." Outside, Sterling watched from behind the frosted glass. For the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to be left out. Not because he lacked skill, but because he had lost his moral compass. When the deal was finalized, Cassian stood, shook Eli's hand, and spoke loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "I hope that from today onward, this won't just be a place that sells luxury cars, but a place that treats everyone with respect, no matter what they're wearing." Sterling turned his face away, but the eyes of the entire showroom had already shifted. They no longer looked at the manager with fear, but with surprise, and a quiet, aching kind of pity, for a man who once had everything and never knew how to hold on to it. Soft golden lights bathed the grand ballroom of the West Arcadia Hotel, where the evening's charity gala was in full swing. A large banner behind the stage read, "Beacon Reach Charity Gala, because every child deserves a future." Amid polite laughter and the gentle clinking of wine glasses, Serenity Blake entered, wearing an elegant square-neck emerald green dress. Not flashy, not trying to stand out. And yet, she stood out effortlessly, just by being herself. She didn't come with her father. Cassian had wanted her to choose how she faced the world that once hurt her, on her own terms. And then, across the room, two pairs of eyes met. A moment that seemed to freeze the air itself. Sterling Cross, standing silently by a banquet table on the right side of the ballroom, went pale the instant he saw her. The girl in the green dress was the same girl he had once humiliated, as if she had no name, no worth. He set his glass of wine down and made his way toward her, like a man drifting without direction. "Serenity Blake," he said, voice raspy, I didn't expect to see you here." She didn't respond. He looked at the floor, then back up, meeting her eyes. "I used to think I knew how to judge people," he said. "I looked at clothes, posture, surface-level confidence, and I let myself believe that was enough. But I was wrong. I was so wrong." Serenity said nothing, no victorious smirk, no sharp words. She simply held his gaze for a long moment, then gave him a small nod. Not forgiveness, but an acknowledgement of the apology, a beginning of redemption. A single gesture. But to Sterling it felt like being handed a second chance at becoming human again. As a waiter passed by, Sterling instinctively reached for a glass of water, not wine. He knew tonight wasn't a celebration. It was the beginning of something else. Knowing when to be quiet, and learning, humbly, how to be a better man. The background music slowed. The entire ballroom of the West Arcadia Hotel dimmed, leaving only a single spotlight shining on the main stage. The host stepped up, voice solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen, to close tonight's gala, please welcome Mr. Cassian Blake, founder of the Beacon Reach Center, and one of the leading investors in the tech and luxury automotive industries." Applause followed, but it gradually quieted as Cassian stepped onto the stage. No tuxedo, no sign of corporate dominance. Just a father, with a storm quietly coiled behind his calm eyes. He looked out over the ballroom, hundreds of eyes from CEOs, investors, showroom executives, and among them, Sterling Cross, sitting silently in the third row. Cassian began slowly. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but some things, if left unsaid, will never be changed. The room fell completely silent. 3 days ago, my daughter, Serenity, visited a luxury car showroom called Valaris Prestige Autos. She simply wanted to touch a dream, but instead she was met with mockery, humiliation, and judgment from people who call themselves automotive consultants. Murmurs began to stir. Some in the crowd turned to glance at Sterling. Cassian continued, his voice lower, firmer. I'm not saying this to seek revenge. I'm saying it because this isn't the first time, and I'm tired. Tired of hearing apologies only after social media erupts, after security footage goes viral, after the victim has already walked away in silence. He raised a hand, gesturing toward the screen behind him. Words appeared in bold, effective tomorrow. Blake Industries will terminate all national contracts with Valaris Prestige Autos. In their place, we will launch a new chain of showrooms, Aurora Atelier, where every customer, regardless of skin color or social standing, is treated with respect. The entire ballroom exploded with murmuring. Some looked panicked. Regional directors of Valaris began pulling out their phones. Sterling sat frozen. Victor Langston, the owner of the Valaris chain, closed his eyes, saying nothing. Cassian looked directly at the front row. I'm not cutting contracts out of anger. I'm cutting them to send a message. A person's value isn't measured by their clothing, nor by their bank account. It's measured by how you treat them when you think they have nothing to offer. Scattered applause, then stronger, then thunderous. But Cassian didn't smile. He simply bowed his head slightly and stepped down, where Serenity stood waiting. No further words were needed. The truth had been laid bare, and the industry was now witnessing its first major quake. 1 week after the gala, light rain fell over Briarfield. The air was chilly but peaceful. Sterling Cross stood silently outside the weathered front gate of Beacon Reach Center, no longer in his expensive suit, no longer the manager of Valaris, just a middle-aged man, holding a brand-new ocean blue backpack. He had come back. Not because he was forced to, but because he wanted to. Inside the small classroom, Zion was doodling a flying car with oversized wings. He turned when he heard the knock. His eyes widened, then lit up. Mr. Sterling. Sterling stepped in, a little awkward, and placed the backpack on the table. I brought you this. Waterproof, cushioned straps, your favorite color. Zion looked at the backpack, then glanced at the old, torn one still tucked under the desk. He didn't leap with joy. He didn't grab it with excitement. He just smiled softly and said something that struck Sterling like a silent bolt. I'll still keep the old one. It's from my mom, but thanks, Mr. Sterling. You don't have to give me anything. I just need you to be a good person. Sterling gripped the strap of the backpack. His eyes turned red, and for the first time in years, he felt light. Later that afternoon, Sterling sat with volunteers, wiping tables, handing out bread. Eli Navarro passed by, nodded with a quiet smile. Serenity, watching from a distance, didn't glare. Her gaze held no anger, just calm acceptance. Cassian Blake walked by slowly. He looked at Sterling. Didn't say a word, just gave a single nod, a small gesture, but it carried the weight of mountains. It wasn't forgiveness, it was the recognition. That change had begun. In a world where people are often judged by their wallet, their clothes, or their reputation, Serenity Blake didn't need revenge. Cassian Blake didn't need to raise his voice. And Zion, an 8-year-old boy, didn't need power to change a man. You see, sometimes what brings an entire system to its knees isn't money, it's kindness, shown at the right moment. Leave a comment if you've ever been judged just by how you looked. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss a story that reminds you that goodness still exists. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.